Hey Spider-Man fans, Monster Master Godzilla here, and I'm back continuing the Spider-Man-A-Thon. We're now up to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Now, here we are. This is the first animated Spider-Man movie to be released in theaters. The very first animated Spider-Man movie to be released in theaters. And this one where they introduced the Spider-Verse on the big screen. And this time they introduced more versions of Spider-Man on the big screen, aside from Peter Parker himself, where they introduced Miles Morales, who is the star of the film. Like right up here, the guy in the middle right here, this guy right here, Miles Morales. This guy right here, Miles Morales, and right next to him is Spider-Gwen. Right there is And right there is Spider-Man Noir. And then there's Spider-Ham. And right there is Penny Parker with the robot named Spider. And so, what I can say about this one is, this one's an awesome... This one serves like a cult follow. This one, when I saw it in the theaters, I got real excited about it, knowing that this is the very first Spider-Man movie to be released in theaters. And this one introduces the Spider-Verse in the big screen. It has a lot of Easter eggs in it, and it was animated. And it shows that... And it all began with the original Peter Parker in Miles' universe. Each Spider-Man has their own intro and what their story is. And he said, like Peter Parker explains that, has their own storylines and explain what their stories are like. And they said, like Peter Parker, the original Peter Parker in Miles' universe was voiced by Chris Pine, and he's been treated like he's a celebrity and stuff. Like he says that he's been a storyline. Like he's been a comic book, been a TV series. Has been a so-so popsicle, he says. And he says that no matter how many times he got his butt kicked, he always get back up. Because he's only one Spider-Man, and you're looking at him. And then we introduced Miles Morales, our main character of the film. He was having struggle being in school, and his dad was a cop named Jefferson Davis, with his mom Rio Morales was a doctor. Yeah, and so the most embarrassing thing is that when Miles was trying to get to school, his dad drove him to school in the cop car, and right in front of when he's about to say goodbye to his dad about being in school, he embarrassed him in front of the school, basically talking to him, saying, "You gotta say I love you back." Dad, see, I want to hear it. I love you, Dad. I love you, Dad. Dad, I love you. Dad, I love you. That's a copy. Right, embarrassed him in front of the school, and that was hilarious. It definitely had its moments where it's pretty funny. And then one day Miles ended up meeting up with a girl, and saying that her name was Gwanda. And then when he ends up meeting up with Aaron, with his Uncle Aaron Davis, which he calls him Uncle Aaron, and who is revealed to be the Prowler. So then when Miles ends up meeting up with after he met up with his uncle, he accidentally gets bitten by a radioactive spider. Originally, he thought he was going through puberty, but when he started being so weird with Gwanda touching on his shoulder, going, "Hey," taught him what his uncle taught him, but it didn't come out how he wanted. He accidentally plucked pluck her hair, which is why the Wanda has one hair that's shaved down, and while it's long on one side. So that's how she got there. And then Miles ends up seeing, and then after he got his spider powers, he ends up meeting up with Spider-Man, and ends up meeting up with Spider-Man, and they had and he ends up and Spider-Man was seen fighting the Green Goblin. He's like, is that Green Goblin? He thought. And while he's fighting the Green Goblin, the Kingpin also appears as the main villain of the story. And the villain of the Kingpin was named Liev Schreiber. Was voiced by Liev Schreiber. And he ends up. And then and not only that, Peter ends up getting into a fight with the Prowler. He ends up getting into a fight with the Prowler. And one day, Miles ends up coming face to face with Spider-Man. And then Spidey shows up saying, he's like, I thought I was the only one. You're like me. And he said, relax. If you stick around, I'll show you the ropes. And he said, I can help you. Relax. If you stick around, I'll show you the ropes. Which pretty much he was about to take Miles under his wing. Which, that's what I would do if I was a superhero and I get a sidekick. I would, of course, take a sidekick under my wing. You know, like, because if something were to happen to me, I would have him become the new defender of my city. So then, sadly, Miles ends up taking the piece of technology that Peter was supposed to steal from the Kingpin, but he failed. So then the Kingpin was about to finish off Spider-Man. He unmasked Peter Parker, and Peter Parker was blonde in Miles' universe for some reason, which I feel that feels like that should have been like Ben Reilly, because Ben Reilly had dyed his hair blonde, and he became Scarlet Spider at one point. So then Miles ends up taking the technology and escapes. The Kingpin unmasks Spider-Man, finding out who he is, and Miles and Peter ends up saying that's a big no-no. And so the Kingpin ends up finishing off Spider-Man, and Spider-Man is dead. And so Spider-Man also died. Oh yeah, in the intro of Into the Spider-Verse, they did make references to a lot of Spider-Man movies. Like, Spider-Man was seen stopping the train from falling, was, of course, from Spider-Man 2. They made a joke about Spider-Man 3, where Spider-Man was dancing around, doing the Bully Maguire dance as regular Spider-Man. And Peter says, we don't need to talk about that one. And well, that's the joke for Spider-Man 3, since Spider-Man 3 gets so much shit. And they also use archive audio from Uncle Ben from the very first Spider-Man movie. And so it was originally... So here we are, and so then after then Peter Parker dies. And now people end up having a funeral for Peter Parker, and then even his girlfriend, even Peter's girlfriend, Mary Jane, and his Aunt May were at the funeral. And a lot of people, including Miles, end up wearing Spider-Man costumes. So he took a Spider-Man costume and he ended up wanting to be his own hero. So then he ends up failing that when the piece of technology broke. And then it turns out he ends up meeting up with Peter Parker again, which turns out to be another Peter Parker from a separate universe. And he's an older version of Peter Parker from a separate universe. And he goes by the name Peter B. Parker, with B meaning Benjamin. And he has a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow on, and has some gray hair growing on the side of his head. And he does have a dad bod, but he didn't seem to give a damn about his body appearance when being Spidey, too. He was trying to lose weight, too. And so, Miles ends up finding out that that's Peter Parker, and not a ghost. The actual Peter Parker from another universe. And he explains that they're from different Earths. And he ends up being in a diner with Peter Parker, which I thought was very funny. And that version of that version of Peter Parker from Peter B. Parker was voiced by Jake Johnson. You know, just to show that's a different version of Peter Parker from a separate universe. And a lot of people didn't like the idea of him being voiced by Peter. That Jake Johnson was voicing Peter Parker because he sounded older than his age, but I'm okay with that, because there are stories where Peter Parker sounded like he's older than 16. Like the 60s Spider-Man cartoon, he sounded older than 20 years old. So then they had a moment when they were in the diner, and he says, I love this burger, so delicious. One of the best burgers I've ever had. You have money, right? I'm not very liquid right now. So Miles ended up learning from Peter Parker that about being Spider-Man. So when they were on the mission at Alchemax, they ended up meeting face to face with an alternative version of Dr. Octopus. Instead of Otto Octavius, it was Olivia Octavius. And so then when they escaped from the Alchemax, Peter tried teaching Miles how to swing. When they had a moment when there was a funny moment where they had a line together, saying, "Time to swing, just like I taught you. When did you teach me that? I didn't. It was just a joke. Team building." So when Miles tried to swing, like thwip, let go, thwip, let go, thwip, let go. I'm proud of us. And then when Miles messed up, they got rescued by Gwen, which when she unmasked herself, she reveals herself to be Gwen Stacy from another universe. So they have a funny moment where it's like this. So there's like, Wanda? And like this, hey guys, Wanda? It's Gwen, actually. Oh, you know her. Very cool. Well, that's because Peter Parker had his own version of Gwen Stacy. And he was amazed that Miles Morales knew Gwen. And Gwen explains that she was from another dimension. In her universe, Gwen Stacy got bitten by a radioactive spider, which is the one that could have bit Peter Parker. And Peter Parker became the Lizard instead of Spider-Man, and Peter Parker died instead of Gwen. Kind of like how instead of Gwen Stacy dying, Peter died in her universe. And they had a moment where they said, and Miles thought, how many spider people are there? Save it for Comic-Con. What's Comic-Con? Let's go. And then, while they were in hiding, they ended up meeting Spider-Man Noir, which is also Peter Parker from an alternative 1933. And he's a private detective in that universe. And he's voiced by Nicolas Cage. While Holly Steinfeld was playing Gwen Stacy, and Shamik Moore voiced Miles. And then after we introduced the Spider-Man Noir, they end up meeting Spider-Ham, which is this little cartoon pig. Yes, I know what you're thinking. In the Simpsons movie, you can say it's Spider-Pig. Spider-Pig does whatever a Spider-Pig does. Can he swing from a web? No, he can't. He's a pig. But actually, Spider-Ham can swing from a web. And then Penny Parker, which is this Asian schoolgirl, has a robot called Spider, which Spiidr, which is from an alternative universe, is pretty much one of the obscure versions of the characters from the Spider-Verse and brought into the big screen. And now people know who they are and stuff. People now know who Miles Morales is, along with Spider-Gwen, and Spider-Ham, and Spider-Man Noir. All brought into the big screen. Yeah, and this time you get to see a lot of these versions of Spider-Man from separate universes. And then then Miles ends up seeing other Spider-Man suits. And the Spider-Man PS4 suit was seen as an Easter egg. You know, the red suit with the white spider in a chest and back. That's that one. And then one day the Kingpin with Scorpion and the Prowler showed up, with Olivia Octavius and Doc Ock ends up causing a rampage, and they battled the villains. And then one day there was the Kingpin, and then one day the Miles ends up finding out who the Prowler really is, and he found out the Prowler turns out to be his Uncle Aaron. And after the Miles found out that the Prowler is his Uncle Aaron, Miles ends up battling the Prowler, and then Miles ends up revealing himself to the Prowler, and then the Prowler realizes who he's battling, and he unmasks himself. But then after they unmask themselves and found out who each other are, the Kingpin ends up shooting Uncle Aaron, and then Miles ends up seeking revenge on the Kingpin, kind of like how Peter Parker ends up swearing revenge on a bad guy who killed his uncle. And then Peter Parker is also Peter B. Parker ends up seeing Aunt Mary Jane. Also and what I forgot to mention is that in Peter B. Parker's universe, he and his wife Mary Jane ended up splitting up, and all because she wanted a child and it scared Peter Parker after he buried Aunt May. So he was trying to be strong on being out on his own without Mary Jane. But then Peter B. Parker sees Mary Jane in the Miles' universe and tried to talk to her, but it just came out as weird to Mary Jane. And so then Miles ends up rebelling against the rest of the Spider Gang, and then he meets up with Aunt May again, and then found the original Spider-Man suit. He ended up making his own Spider-Man suit, this time black and red, all black and red, instead of having the traditional red and blue like Peter Parker. And also Miles had a few things that Peter didn't have. One was cloaking, which one was camouflage, and Venom Blast. And Venom Blast is this electric pulse that comes out of his hands. He can still shoot webs and crawl on walls and have spider sense and spider strength like Peter Parker. But it's just those two things is something that Peter Parker didn't have. And he's always younger than Peter Parker. And so the Spider-Verse, the Spider Gang ends up taking on the bad guys, and all the members got back to their proper worlds, and Miles is left taking on the Kingpin all by himself. The Kingpin was trying to bring back his family, Richard Fisk and his wife Vanessa, who died in Miles' universe, but wanted to have his family back when he found him in another dimension, but it was foiled thanks to Miles. It was a good change-up instead of like Peter. And I thought the final battle between Miles and the Kingpin was an awesome change-up instead of Peter Parker, because it feels like Miles is not only saving his universe, but avenging the Spider-Man of his universe along with Uncle Aaron. So yeah, he's avenging both. He is avenging both Spider-Man and Uncle Aaron. And so the Kingpin was defeated, and justice is served. So all the Spider-Men got back to their normal lives. And Peter B. Parker then rekindled his relationship with Mary Jane of his universe. And so Miles ends up becoming his own Spider-Man. So he ends up being his own Spider-Man, and he ends up saving his own city and his own world as he learned how to become his own Spider-Man. And then later in the film, it ends where it has two post-credit scenes. One is where he ends up meeting Gwen Stacy again, and the second post-credit scene ends with Spider-Man 2099, who will appear in the sequel coming up. And the Spider-Man 2099 ends up having a device that travels him from different Earths. And he ends up having a funny cameo with Spider-Man from the 1967 TV show. And they had a funny moment where they're looking like they're pointing at each other, and they argued on who's pointing at who. And that's the end of that one. And that was... So, what can I say? So, what can I say about this one? Would I recommend this movie? Absolutely. This is a must-have in your Spider-Man movie collection. I consider this like a cult classic. Like an instant cult classic for the Spider-Man movies. Especially since it's animated. Like, it's animated, and it's as what critics are calling it, a great Spider-Man adventure for everybody. Especially if you want to learn, especially when you want to introduce yourself to other versions of Spider-Man besides Peter Parker. So, it's definitely a must-have in your Spider-Man film collection. You gotta grab this one. It would make a great taste in your mouth, and I guarantee it. I would never steer you wrong with... I will not steer you... I promise you, I won't steer you wrong with this one. It's a must-have in your Spider-Man collection. And that's all I have to say, folks. And as always, stay awesome Spider-Man fans. And all my Monster Masters. And stay tuned for more. We will be reviewing Spider-Man Far From Home. And that's all I have to say, folks. And as always, stay amazing, my Spider-Man fans. And that's all I have to say. Goodbye.